So here we are, another Mental Health Monday. When we started this, we weren't sure how long it would last, and we're strapped in for the long haul. And this is a really important part of our weekly rhythm here at the Refuge. Our hope for this was to be able to provide some resources, some hope, some tools, some encouragement for all of us in how to stay healthy mentally during this time. And so we are really grateful to have such awesome friends of the Refuge who are able to come on and share with us and offer some tools and some support and some ideas. The work that they all do looks different, but there's a common theme, and it really is helping people sustain and be as healthy as possible. So that's our hope in our heart. I'm here with my friend Joanna Rainey and Ramón Chaparro, who is a good friend from a long time and also a therapist. I'm part of the Refuge Advisory team. And so I just want to say to everybody listening and watching, we're really glad you're here, and we hope that you keep at it every Monday, and then keep sharing with friends who might need some encouragement, both on Facebook, and you can always send the link through text and through email and other ways to get it in the right hands.
Yeah, it's free therapy. Why not? We could all use some free therapy. I'm super excited to have Ramón here. Ramón and his wife, Cassie, were my roommates for 3 years. Wonderful years where they're so patient living with me for that long. And but a good friend and just a lovely heart and just a really amazing counselor here in Denver. So we'd love to hear what you have to say, Ramón. And just a reminder that there'll be questions below the YouTube video, and it'd be really good to try to interact with the content somehow with someone else if you can. So take it away, friend.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate you having me on today. This Mental Health Monday is such a great idea and such an important part of taking care of ourselves, right? I think at the beginning, Phyllis was the one who said, everybody's hearing about wash your hands and don't touch your face and do this, but taking care of our minds, taking care of our souls, that's the thing that kind of is slowly starting to get more attention, but something like this is a great way just to help us all stay on track. So thanks for having me. And so I was trying to think about what to share during this time, and I actually had one of my clients kind of give me an idea, and that was a lot of folks, have been struggling with anxiety and disruption of normal life routines in this time during the COVID pandemic. And so I've just been broaching that with everyone that I meet with, like, how are you doing with this? What are the changes you're experiencing? How are you handling those? And this one client caught me off guard because, I was like, yeah, man, there's so many changes and things are so chaotic. And I'm just wondering how you're handling that. And his response was, this isn't that different for me from the country where I'm from. This is very regular. We have this kind of thing all the time where it's not safe and we have to be inside, and you just build a rhythm around that. And it really got me thinking, right? In that mindset of how each of us have different experiences, different contexts, different settings where we've grown accustomed to life being a certain way, and that context kind of determines how we are experiencing this COVID pandemic right now. And for him, it wasn't that big of a change from the normal. And in fact, in some ways, it felt more normal to him than kind of what he had been experiencing here in the States. And so that kind of got my wheels spinning and thinking about one big way that I feel like we may be experiencing COVID right now, which is this idea of culture shock. And so at work, I work at an integrated care clinic. So that's a clinic that has primary care health, it has mental health care, dental care, all under the same roof. And so, a lot of my coworkers who are nurse practitioners, they're day-to-day, face-to-face with with folks who, have regular health issues, and then also some concerns about, if they may have COVID or not. Um, and the way that our clinic did that 3-4 weeks ago versus the way we do it now is very different. And it's something that actually has changed every couple days as sort of the state and the CDC give new guidelines. And I noticed at work, people were getting shorter with each other as far as like, just getting irritated faster, just seeming exhausted all the time. And after this client said that helped me have that reframe, I thought, oh yeah, we're all in the middle of this culture shock, right? We were used to things going a certain way to where you don't have to spend any brain energy. You just kind of are in the routine, in the rhythm. And now every day are new things, new changes, new ways of being, both as far as our procedures, but also in how much distance we have between each other, and the ways that we talk to each other now that we have surgical masks on our face all the time. So there's all these changes, and the energy that we need to use to kind of process those changes and adjust to them, it's exhausting. And it produces a lot of secondary effects. And so I wanted to kind of approach this from that direction today, because I'm wondering if a lot of us may be experiencing that in our various contexts, even if we're mostly at home with our family. Just the way that the world around us has changed is forcing us to change in some ways in how we live in that world. So the first thing I wanted to do is just kind of talk about with culture shock, right? There's two concepts here. So one is stress. So the word stress has a lot of meanings, a lot of ways that it's used. The way I want to use it today is that stress is what happens. It's the gap between what the environment around me demands from me and what are the resources or abilities that I have internally and within my reach to meet those demands. So stress happens when the demands of the environment exceed kind of my ability and my resources to meet them. And so that can look a lot of different ways, and that the amount of stress that's there can change based on what my resources and abilities are, or based on what the demands of the environment are. The demands of the environment right now with the COVID pandemic are exceeding a lot of our capacities, because we're not used to having to think all the time about what it means to be sanitary, to try to stay away from kind of infectious environments. And so a lot of us are experiencing stress in that big way. But I feel like it can be helpful to name it, right? Because we carry it in our body, like our shoulders maybe start to hunch in, our jaw maybe is clenching, your neck. I think each of us carries stress in different places that can be familiar, but sometimes we just carry it there and we don't name it, right? So I just want to name that is stress. And what that stress is what the environment is demanding from you is more than what you have to meet it right now. The second piece of that's good news, is you got this. You're made for this. Our bodies, our minds are made to respond to stress. Yes, it can exceed our capacities right now. It may exceed our capacities to an extent that we just really feel like almost paralyzed, or like just don't know what to do, feel really, upset and turned around. But we are designed to slowly grow our capacity and our ability to meet that stress, or to meet that gap between what the environment demands and what we have. So I do want to say that's good news, that right now it may feel like, man, I don't know what to do. But I want to encourage you, look back over the last 3 weeks. Think about how it was when this started and where you're at now, and think, are there things that I've learned to do to kind of meet the demands of the environment that I didn't know how to do 3 weeks ago? And that question can be hard, because maybe there's also some things that have gotten harder in the last 3 weeks. But I think if we take the time to think about, what have I learned to do that I didn't know how to do before, we can find some what we call sparkling moments, right? We can find those things about us that have kind of risen to the challenge. We can find those resources that maybe we didn't have and others around us help to bring to us, that we have now. And that can be really important, to recognize the ways that we're slowly meeting the challenges and the demands of the environment around us. And so that's the first part, is stress, right? Stress is that gap, and thinking about how have I grown to meet and shrink that gap between what the environment demands and what I have to give. And then the second part is talking about culture shock has stages, right? And stages kind of have to do with our relationship with that stress. So, there's a lot of different models, but the one that's kind of common is 4 stages of culture shock. And the first one is the honeymoon stage, right? So there's this aspect of maybe when the shut it or the stay at home started, that there may have been some kind of like, okay, these are some new things. Maybe for some people, it's like, okay, I get to work from home and now I don't have to sit in traffic for an hour and a half to get there. And that's a new thing, and it's kind of interesting. There's some energy in learning new routines about like sanitizing, or, putting a face mask on when you go outside, and these kinds of things. Um, and the honeymoon period can last different amounts of time for different people based on their experiences, but where we all end up eventually is this frustration period of the honeymoon is over. Now I'm at home, or now I'm out of work. Resources are getting tight. Every day I'm spending so much energy trying to do this new life that I is not familiar to me, that I don't feel like I have the resources to meet, and that frustration can build. And again, that can be the short temper, that can be the fatigue, that can be a lot of different things where we just feel out of sorts and just wish we could go back to the way it was, right? I just wish I could go back to the normal life that I had before, when I didn't have to think about it, when I didn't have to expend that energy. Um, on the other side of frustration is an adjustment period. And that's where we find ourselves starting to find the groove, right? So when we're talking about that stress, that's when we find ourselves starting to meet the demands of the environment in ways that we couldn't before. And unfortunately, we can't until we go through that frustration period, right? But that adjustment period is when we start to realize, oh, there are some things that I do now without having to think and concentrate on it really hard that maybe I didn't before. Maybe it's something simple like I kind of unconsciously sanitize my hands when I come in from outside, whereas before I had to think about it, and now it kind of happens more automatically. Maybe I'm washing my hands more and different things. There's just that 6 feet of distance. Maybe it's more automatic to kind of like when I do have to go out to already know in my mind kind of what that distance feels like, so I don't have to calculate and be, okay, here's 2 cart lengths, and it's just more natural and flowing with it. And so that adjustment period is when I start to recognize that I have some competence now that I didn't have before. And that's really important, to try to pause and slow down and recognize those competences, right? Because one of the things that stress of culture shock does is, underneath, we start telling ourselves a story, and I'll kind of get to the story part here in a little bit, but where, since the strengths and abilities I have aren't meeting the demands of the environment, these stories start to develop of me being incompetent, or me, not being enough, or, me kind of these things. And instead of being focused on this current moment and the demands of this current environment, it becomes about me as a person through all time. And I start to like live in that story of, oh, this is who I am. I'm someone who doesn't have enough to meet the moment. So it's really important for even small things like sanitizing your hands when you come in from outside, to recognize, okay, there's a competence. Like I've learned to do that, and I wasn't able to do that before. So what does it mean about me that I was able to learn that in 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Okay, now I kind of have this 6 feet of distance thing down a little bit. What does it mean that now that's more of a natural thing? And then we start to build a different story, a counter story, right? Um, and so that's kind of in the adjustment period when we recognize that. And then the final period is acceptance. Okay. And this is a strange time with the COVID pandemic, as far as, we get an order that says stay home until April 13th, then it's April 26th, and then it's May, it keeps extending out. And so there's an uncertainty that's always there of like, we go, oh, I can do this for 2 weeks, or, oh, I can do this for 4 weeks. And then it keeps going out, right? And so it's kind of like the rug feels like it may be getting pulled out from under us. And there is a certain place that we can get to of this being a new normal. And I know that that feels maybe not very possible for some of us right now. But the reality is that because we're kind of reacting to a somewhat unprecedented situation, at least in our context, that there is going to be a different kind of normal. And that even if the order comes, you know, on April 26th, okay, everything's good, go back to normal, it's going to be weird for all of us, right? We talk about re-entry shock with culture shock, right? When I go back to my home culture, it doesn't feel the same as it did when I left because now I've had this different experience. And so the acceptance piece is hard to imagine when we're not there, but just know that that is what our bodies and our minds are helping us adjust to and get to. And there can be a time where we are able to weather the changes of this uncertain time without expending so much energy and without feeling so incompetent to meet the demands of the environment. Um, and so I like to have those stages out. And I don't know, Joe and I have had conversations about this, and this is a big part, I think, of Joe's work. Sometimes knowing how those things kind of unfold can help us to kind of prepare ourselves, right? Mentally, emotionally, like, okay, there's going to be this time of just frustration where I feel like I can't do anything, but there will be a time on the other side when I start to feel like I can do things again. And if I know that that's coming, I can look for it. And then when I find it, I go, that's it. Things are starting to turn. Things are starting to change. And so that's really important, is to know things are changing, you are changing, and to be looking out for that. So that's kind of one part, right? The culture shock metaphor of we're all living in a different culture right now than we were 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it's pretty interesting that the pandemic is global and that we've seen the changes that we're experiencing now happening in other places maybe 2 months before us. And it seemed really far and different. And now we're living that way too. And so um, that way of looking at it can be helpful as far as knowing, okay, this is going to maybe unfold in a certain kind of way, and this is the way that I'm changing to meet the demands of the environment. So that is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it that's connected to that is, like I said, this idea of stories that develop. I work with a lot of folks who come from a lot of different cultural backgrounds, a lot of folks who did not grow up in the United States and now they're here. Now that they're here, they have a lot of different identities, a lot of different socioeconomic statuses, a lot of different documentation statuses. So people's experience of the United States is very different. And there is many times a story of what the United States is that people hear when they're not here. And they come here expecting that story, and they experience something different, and they have to rewrite that story. And rewriting that story also is rewriting kind of how they relate to the US and how they relate to themselves. And so this process of meeting reality and the story changing is something that we're also, I think, dealing with writ large in our society and our culture right now as this pandemic is happening. And it kind of looks a couple different ways. But for many of us, our identities are being disrupted right now. And that's one of the most tiring and exhausting things, is when we're in the familiar routines, the familiar social settings, we generally have a sense of where I belong in this regular day to day, right? And even if we don't like it or wish we were different, had a different identity, a different status, the familiarity of it allows us to not expend so much energy on it. And what this pandemic is doing right now for us is two things. So when we talk about privilege, which is the idea that based on our identities, our social status, that there's certain value that's attached to it based on a narrative that our society and our culture have. Some of those privileges are being really highlighted and amplified right now. And then some of them are being reallocated. There are different identities that are privileged now than were before. So as far as the ones that are being amplified, right, for those of us who have less access to resources, who live, with less economic means, some of that disparity is being amplified right now as people who are able to work from home, people who are able to get the, the technological things their kids need to school from home, are living a very different experience in this pandemic than those of us whose jobs were in the restaurant industry, or whose jobs depended on customer flow and our companies have laid us off, or maybe just we don't have any work. And then for some of my clients who are undocumented, they don't have access to any of these relief packages or stimulus that's coming from the government. So we're having a wide range of different experiences of this pandemic and the responses to it. And some of that's being amplified. Some of that disparity is being amplified. For others of us now, sometimes we're being kind of given like a privilege or a status, at least, kind of in the public image that we didn't have before. Have you ever heard so many people talking about how important it is to be someone working in a grocery store and stocking shelves and checking people out? Um, I think that all the time we should recognize the importance of that. However, I think that this pandemic is shifting, at least for this moment, kind of the larger social narrative around the importance of a job like that. And so maybe before, where that was a job that some people may have looked down on, that now you hear people talking about how important it is. Where before maybe people, they might have thought, oh, doctors and nurses, maybe they make good money or kind of whatever, but now people are singing from the balconies and doing these kinds of things. There's a privilege and a status that's being associated with that wasn't before. Now, obviously, the shadow side of that is, yes, there are folks who are kind of more at risk because of their job, that right now they're kind of more unable to distance themselves from exposure. But that changing pattern, whether it's having more elevated status or lowered status now, is a change in identity, an identity disruption that that takes some of our resources, right? And so I wanted to kind of give a couple practical tips about what does it look like to be aware of how these changes may be affecting us, and then maybe allow ourselves also to tap into those things that are true about us, regardless of how everything around us is shifting, which I feel like Phyllis and Ellen and Kay all have touched on this, and I wanted to make sure to touch on it as well. And so the first part of that is, how can we be in our body? And so in general, when that stress gets high enough that our demands can't meet it, one of the mechanisms, and it's a survival mechanism that our brain uses, is to kind of pop us out of our brain. So we're not thinking so hard and concentrating so hard on things, but we can kind of live in this place of reaction and survival. However, if we're in that place for too long without being able to get back into that prefrontal cortex thinking, communicating, problem solving, relationship building, that can have some really negative consequences for us if we're there all the time. So learning to be in our body in these stressful situations can be really important. The way that I am approaching it is with this culture shock metaphor, right? I have a friend named Marcia Warren Edelman, who is a counselor in Boulder, and she talks about something called embodied code switching. So this is the idea that when we move between environments where our cultural competence is high to where our cultural competence is low, that we can actually feel in our body that change, right? When we have that high responsiveness, that high competence, it's very comfortable and relaxing. Oh, I know what to do here. I know what to expect. I know how close to stand to someone. I know what kind of words to say to start a conversation and to end a conversation. But when I move into a different environment where those things aren't familiar to me, it takes more energy, more resources, and my body usually responds in some kind of way. Often those stress ways that I talked about at the beginning, the clenching of the jaw, the hunching of the shoulders, the tightening of the neck muscle, the stomach kind of tightening, the sweating in the palms, right? And a lot of times we're not aware that as we go from place to place, that our body is changing in that way. Maybe for some of you, where the refuge feels like the place where it's really your tribe and your people, that you haven't ever paid attention to, how does it feel when I walk into the refuge versus when I walk into other environments where I don't feel as understood or don't feel as familiar of an environment. And so an exercise you can do even in your own house is if you stand on one side of the room and you picture on the other side of the room kind of that environment where you don't feel comfortable, which for us right now maybe that environment over there is kind of the places or the situations where I feel most exposed and most scared related to COVID. Okay. And then I'm going to picture that on the other side of the room and I'm going to walk toward it slowly. And as I walk towards it, I'm paying attention to my body. And as I get closer to it, what we often find is something will change in my body as I'm getting closer to this uncomfortable thing that I don't want, don't understand, or feel uncomfortable in. And it may be a slight tightening in the stomach, maybe a slight kind of flutter kind of feeling, maybe my fingers get a little tingly. That's helping us to understand how does our body communicate to us right now that it's feeling that stress level building. Okay. And so the purpose of that exercise is to get to know your body better, get to know how your body is trying to work with you to help you understand when that stress is exceeding what you are able to do to meet it. And if you're able to, in that moment where you feel it building, if you're able to kind of step back to a place where that stress isn't so high, then you can do that. Sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes we just need to do what needs to be done. But the more that we're aware of that and the more that we can expect it, then the easier it is to meet the challenges of those moments. And then you do the exercise on the other side, right? So you stand on the other side of the room and you picture on the other side of the room, where do you feel most comfortable, most safe, most understood, most competent, most able to meet the demands of the environment, and then walk towards it and feel how your body changes as you move towards it. And often we'll feel kind of a relief. The muscles start to relax, the breathing gets easier and deeper, heart rate kind of slows down. Um, and so this is an exercise that can kind of help us to gain some familiarity with our body and how it responds. And then and then use that information to understand when we feel like the stress is overcoming us. Um, a second thing that you can do is, when you're living in a different cultural setting than what's familiar and where you feel confident, any reminder of home is really important and really valuable and can really bring a lot of relief. And so have some things in your life that are familiar still. If everything outside with COVID and being at home, everything feels different from the normal routine, think about what are the little things that I can do that remind me of kind of quote unquote regular life. Maybe it's now my kids are homeschooling, so we don't really use backpacks, but maybe it is just there's something about like putting things in a backpack and putting it over your shoulder, even if you're just walking from one room to the next. Maybe there's something about that just feels familiar. Um, you know, yeah, anyway, you all know what are the things that are familiar. And so think about those and think, how can I build those into my life so I have that regular touch point every day, to be able to feel like, okay, this is familiar and this doesn't require so much energy from me. And then the last thing I wanted to say is figuring out how to be like not just in our body, but also in our mind. Um, and this looks different for a lot of different people, right? Like our minds, for some of us right now, kind of a lot of the thoughts and the fear and the things that are running around, the reminders of difficult things that we've been through before, traumas that we've had before. Some of those things are in a lot of our minds right now, and so our minds feel like a really kind of dangerous place to be in. Um, and I just want to acknowledge that and say that, just as others have said, sometimes being in your mind is possible and sometimes it's really not. And so, listen to yourself, trust yourself and what you can do in that regard. But if you can go there, try to approach it with a curiosity, related to, again, what are the things that you're learning about yourself in this new environment, in this new normal? One of the things that some folks experience overseas is new parts of their personality come out that never existed before. Um, and that curiosity about what is this part of me? What is this new ability that I'm finding in myself that I didn't have before? can really be just a really joyful experience of like learning that. Um, Also, some parts of ourselves may come out that we are not so excited came out, but having the curiosity just to see what it is. Um, and and then also being able to have the curiosity to see what are the things, what are the strengths, what are the characteristics about me that are helping me to survive right now. What is it that's helping me to sort of keep moving forward as the demands of this environment exceed what I thought my abilities were? Maybe I'm finding that actually what I thought I couldn't do before I can now, and that curiosity helps me to identify, you know what, I'm a survivor. You know what, I'm flexible, I'm resilient, I'm creative. um, there might be many things that you didn't realize were you until this situation and your response to it. And so taking some time to be curious about that, that can be journaling potentially. Another one I like exercise is just kind of thinking about clouds in the sky and kind of taking all the jumbled sort of feeling and body tightness and everything that's inside and just picturing myself take one thing out and put it in a cloud in the sky as it goes across so that I can just name it, right? Like, oh, okay, that's my fear. I see you, fear. Oh, okay, that's my uncertainty. I see you, uncertainty. Oh, okay, that's my resilience. I see you, resilience. Thank you. And just having a way to slow the train down and be able to identify what are those things that are happening in my mind. Um, it can be a way for that curiosity to help us to know ourselves better. And as we know ourselves better, our reaction to the demands of the environment increase. And so um, the last thing is we have to be in our world, right? Sometimes to survive, we do have to kind of go out of our mind for a while, you know, daydream and go to different places. But the reality is that we live in this world right now, that the COVID pandemic is reality for us right now. And we have to find the ways to be in that reality. I don't think that that means watching the news about COVID 24/7. In fact, please don't do that. um, but it does mean kind of figuring out what does it mean to live in this new normal. And I think that sometimes that reaction to kind of pop out and go somewhere else is really because we don't believe that we can meet the demands of the environment. And so I want to circle back at the end of all this to where we started, which is you got this. Like you were made to do this. We as humanity are made to do this, to change and to respond to the demands of the environment. And that's something that connects us. I know that right now with physical distancing and social isolation and everything, it can be really hard to feel connected to folks. Something that does connect us is that all of us are made to respond to the demands of the environment by growing, because we are growing creatures. Humans are growing creatures. And so if that gives you a sense of connection, if that helps you to be in the world, please embrace that, because we're all in this together. So that's what I got.
Oh, that was so good. I felt myself over and over saying, so good, so good. So thank you, Ramon. And we are really grateful to have that wisdom and challenge and practical and the mix for all of this to ponder. So please use the discussion questions that are in the YouTube link. Think about them yourself, talk about them with somebody, and keep remembering you were made for this. We were made for this. We're going to make it. We were made for this.
Thanks, friends.